Yeah, SOC 119. It was the show that grew out of
really?
that I did with my wife called You Can't Say That. It's the show that won an Emmy Award, actually.
Really? Emmy Award?
Emmy Award. And we were going to broadcast it across the United States, and we thought they were going to say, okay, let's go. Let's move forward with the show and let's make it happen. They said, no, it's not happening. And in a moment, I said,
안녕하세요. 세바시 45의 구범준 PD입니다. 자, 오늘도 아주 특별한 손님을 모셨습니다. 여러분들이 아주 좋아하는, 제일 좋아하는 미국인 교수님입니다. 샘 리처드 교수님인데요. 교수님이 이번에 한국 독자들을 위해서만 책을 냈습니다. 스윗 스팟'이라는 제목의 책인데요. 자, 오늘 펜실베이니아 주립대학교 사회학과 교수이자 우리나라 건국대학교 석좌 교수인 샘 리처드 교수님 모시고 이야기 나눠보겠습니다. Hello, Sam.
hello, Omchun. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice
I'm
to
really
see you
happy
again.
to be here, actually.
Right. Your book, The Sweet Spot, explores the idea of balance and finding harmony in life. Can you briefly introduce the core message of your book to our audience?
Yeah, so most of us, all of us actually, we live in a constant state of balance and imbalance. And it's important to recognize this and to see it because we're all struggling to find that balance. And it's elusive. It's constantly slipping through our fingers. And in the end, what we really want to do is figure out how to live this stable life so that we're not on the roller coaster, up and down and up and down and up and down.
Right.
Yeah, this is the thing that I'm really responding to in the book.
Why did you choose to write about this topic?
You know, I've spent my entire life trying to figure out how to achieve a state of balance, so how to get meaning in life through a permanent state of balance. So I've worked really hard to get there. But then at some point I discovered that permanent state of balance really doesn't happen. And part of the meaning in life is figuring that out. And I really finally got there, and so I started to talk about it in this book.
So does that mean we can never achieve that balance? What exactly the sweet spot?
So I talked about this constant state of balance, right? An imbalance. And, you know, I'm always asking myself questions. Well, we all are, right? Like, how did this thing happen again? You know, how do I fix this problem over here? How do I make sense of this part of my life? How do I make the right decision? Should I change my job or should I stay in my job? What should I do? You know, all these questions. But the thing is, you know, we don't necessarily get to a final answer to that because as soon as we get to an answer to one of those questions, other problems arise. Right. And the more quickly we can get to a state of rebalancing, the more easily, that's what I call the sweet spot. You know, when we get there quickly, it's very smooth, this process. You know, I'm in balance, and then suddenly I realize that, and the imbalance leads to another state of balance, and that's the sweet spot. Okay. It's that seamless, very quiet, very subtle movement from one state to another.
Okay. Many people confuse the idea of balance with perfection. But in the sweet spot, you emphasize that balance is not about making everything equal. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, so, you know, we don't ever achieve a state of perfection, right? Because, you know, once again, the balance leads to imbalance. You know, it's very Confucian, this idea, right? And so it's not about perfection. It's about enjoying the state of movement back and forth between balance, imbalance, balance, imbalance.
So the sweet spot is not a specific point, but rather a state of being, right?
Yeah.
So how can people recognize when they found their personal sweet spot?
Well, you know, find a moment when you get really frustrated with something. You know, you're really trying to make something happen and you can't make it happen. Maybe you're almost there and then something gets in the way and you have to make a different decision. And so then you resolve that problem, that issue, and then something else gets in the way and trips us up. There's always something that comes up and that we struggle with. And pay attention to how often we feel so frustrated or struggling with something. And then what it takes for us to come to restore balance in ourselves, to relax, to say like, okay, hang on, now it's calm again. And then something happens and we get thrown off.
Okay.
And I think pay attention to that process of this back and forth and back and forth.
I became accustomed to rebalancing. Does that ultimately mean I found my sweet spot?
Yeah, because know that you're living in the sweet spot.
Okay,
when that resettling, when it becomes easier, that almost you don't notice it. The frustration comes quickly and it goes away quickly. That sense that I'm trying to walk through a doorway, but the handle won't open for me. And I think, why won't that handle open? What's going on? So I feel a frustration, but then how quickly can I get past that frustration? How quickly can I accept that, okay, that door was not supposed to open for me. It's something else. And as that happens quickly and quietly, then we're living closer to our sweet spot.
Okay.
It's not we all make plans in our lives. We think, I'm going to reshape my life or do something in my life so I arrive somewhere and I'll then be in my sweet spot. That's when I'm really going to be living a happy life. But when you get to the happy life, the same frustrations, the same things that bothered us back in the other life are going to bother us in the new life. So it's coming to terms with that, coming to an understanding of that, and being able to sort of restore that order in our lives. Again, very quickly. We want to do it very quickly.
So you mentioned that sweet spot is different for everyone and can change over time.
Yeah.
So what factor influence a person's sweet spot, and how should they adjust as their lives evolve?
Well, first is, do we want to be living in a different way? Do we want to be living in a place where we quickly rebound? Do we enjoy the frustration? Do we enjoy sort of the trying to achieve things and maybe not being able to achieve them? Do we enjoy being in that roller coaster of life? Or do we want to find a greater sense of equanimity, as we say in English? And if we want the equanimity, then we're going to have to realize that it's going to happen right now. We don't wait. We don't arrive at it. We have to achieve it right now, right in the moment. Every moment is an opportunity to be in that sweet spot.
I think that your way of thinking is very Eastern.
It's very Eastern. Yeah. This is the practice of Confucianism, This is Buddhism. This is people sit and they meditate all day to get to a place of balance and equanimity.
Have you personally experienced a time when your sweet spot changed? And how did you adapt?
15 years ago, I realized, when I was doing so many things in the world, and I realized that I had to really take this more seriously because I was getting tired of kind of this. First off, I've always been able to adapt very quickly to get to a certain place in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. One time, for example, we were working on a television show.
A television show?
From my class, We were set. We were going to broadcast.
Like today? SOC 119?
Yeah, SOC 119. It was the show that grew out of
really?
that I did with my wife, called You Can't Say That. It's the show that won an Emmy Award, actually.
Oh, really? Emmy Award?
Emmy Award. And we were going to broadcast it across the United States, and we did the first episode, the pilot episode, and that's the one that won the award. And so we had a meeting with people at the university, and we thought they were going to say, okay, let's go. Let's move forward with the show, and let's make it happen. And instead, they said, hey, we're not doing this.
Why not?
I'll never know. But the point is, I walked into the meeting with the idea that we were going to be working on the show. And in a moment, they said, no, it's not happening. And in a moment, I said, okay, all right. And the person we were speaking with who delivered the bad news thought that I was going to be really upset about this. But in that moment, I was able to say, no, It doesn't matter. That's good. We just go in a different direction.
Oh, yeah.
But we had worked for 2 years on this project.
Oh, really?
And that was a moment when I knew that I was living, at some deep way, I was living in my sweet spot. Just that quickly I recovered.
You're like an angel.
If
I were you, I'm gonna pretty upset, and I tried to destroy everything.
Yeah, no, it could have been very upsetting, but it wasn't the path that we were supposed to be on, and so we just let it go that fast. Yeah.
Some people might say, I don't know what my sweet spot is. What is the first practical step they can take to start discovering it?
Don't try to figure out what your sweet spot is what I would say. Try to figure out ways to quickly readjust your orientation when things don't open in the way that we imagine. It's driving our car down the road and we're expecting some other driver to do something and they don't. And then we feel something about that. Just very quickly, just readjust and accept that what we thought was going to happen is not going to happen. Yeah. And that's the way to begin. It's all the tiny little things. It's not the big things. It doesn't happen in some, hey, let me change my job and start over. It happens when I put my jacket on and I walk through the door and leave the building. Yeah, it's all the tiny little things.
Okay, readjust is important.
Readjust, constantly readjust.
Let's talk about the sweet spot in a moment. But at this time, I'd like to ask a few other questions. You have studied Korea for many years. What initially sparked your interest in Korea?
Back in 1984, I was studying Latin America and the military governments in Latin America. And we had a new graduate student enter my program from Korea. So I started learning about the military government here. And I was making comparisons between the Korean government and the governments that I was exploring. And that's when I first learned something really about Korea, And I started reading about Korean society, Korean politics. And I tasted Korean food for the first time. And that was really the beginning. And then the next year I met 3 other graduate students from Korea at a different university. And that was really rare. So in a matter of 2 years, I met 4 Korean sociology graduate students. And so it really just jump-started my interest in Korea.
So how has your perception of Korea changed over time?
Well, I think when I first started thinking about Korea, when I was first studying Korea, Korea wasn't nearly as wealthy as it is today. This was the early 1980s, the mid-1980s. And so over time, I've watched as Korea has gotten wealthier and wealthier and more modernized. And I think my perception has changed as a result of that. As well, I think I've started paying attention to all of the cultural content coming out of Korea. And then eventually I learned this term, Hallyu. And Hallyu opened up a whole new world for me.
In your thought, what are the most common misconceptions Westerners have about Korea?
I think a lot of Westerners have this idea that Koreans, East Asians in general, but Koreans in particular, are very reserved and very shy. And I don't think that they understand how this kind of way of holding themselves. In English, we have this word comportment. Comportment is just the way we are in our bodies. How that, for Koreans, how that's built into this culture of communitarian relationships, or as you often say here in Korea, collectivism. And I think we don't really get that. So we have this idea that Koreans are reserved in their own individual worlds, but we don't understand the ways in which Koreans are looking around them and modulating or adjusting their behavior according to their surroundings. Always practicing, using nunchi to adjust. I have something to add to that I think is good. Shy and reserved people could not create the modern technological state that is Korea. Shy, reserved people could not do what Koreans have done in the past 50 and 60 years.
You have observed Korean pop culture, including K-pop and K-dramas. Why do you think Korean content has become so globally successful?
You know, I've often discussed how respect and humility are woven into Korean culture. And I think respect and humility are woven into Korean content that content producers are sending around the world. And people see this. And it emerges in K-dramas, K-film, K-pop. It emerges out of Korean culture. And I think that's something that's very attractive to people around the world. What occurs it's just kind of, even in relationships between characters, I think that Koreans have a way of dealing with sexuality and dealing with violence. It's very different. People around the world who have a more traditional way of seeing life are very attracted to that. And most people are drawn toward respect and humility, self-respect, in particular. And I think that Korea becomes attractive to people around the world because of that. I'll add to that. So you take that respect and humility and you link it together with tradition. And that becomes very appealing. Because you see the tradition here in Korean culture. It lives, it thrives. And people have a fascination with tradition. You know, we want modern Korea, but having modern Korea that's embedded in a traditional culture is even better because you get the best of both worlds.
Why Korean tradition attract people?
You know, it's any tradition at all. It doesn't matter. You know, there's something about tradition. People want to look backwards. We don't necessarily want to study history, but we like looking backwards, and we like seeing that what happened in the past is brought into the present and will continue into the future. And so, you know, I think about all the Korean dramas and films around that are in settings, you know, 100 years ago, 200, 500, 600 years ago in the Joseon period. I scroll through my Netflix and it's just one after another from Joseon times. I think, oh my gosh, like, it's there. The past lives in the present.
In one of your lectures, Sebasi Talks, you mentioned that Korea is one of the most community-oriented societies. What do you think are the biggest strengths of Korean culture to the world?
Well, I don't necessarily think the world sees it, but there is this kind of collective or community nationalism here. It's not a political nationalism, but it's like a cultural nationalism, you know? You know, I go out to dinner here a lot with my friends, and they say, okay, what kind of food are we going to eat? Well, we're going to have Korean food. And I might say, well, what if we go to this French restaurant or Italian or something else? It's like, yeah, okay, no, we go to Korean restaurants. But here in Korea, there are restaurants from around the world, but it's really overwhelmingly Korean. Koreans love Korea.
Right.
And that's like, are proud of Korea. You know, what's actually quite interesting to me is that, you know, people often tell me, oh, you're the professor who talks about Korea. And they thank me for talking about Korea. They thank me for loving Korea, and they thank me for helping them love their own country. And I think that's kind of unique, really.
But among us, inside us, we don't like our nation.
Yeah, but you know, but that is a narrative here. The fact is, inside, you do. And it's this kind of cultural, again, the cultural nationalism. It's not the flag, it's the culture, it's the people, it's the way of being. It's the tradition that Koreans really hang on to. And I think we see that in a lot of the K content that is exported around the world.
I'm wondering what the difference is from US. Isn't it the same in the US? Looking at the recent election, Trump won by advocating for a strong America, emphasizing the country positions as a world #1 nation.
You know, a lot of times bullies have to be bullies because they're uncertain about themselves. You know, so bullies are actually being bullies because they're afraid. And so aggressive dogs are really fearful dogs. And so they bark and they attack other dogs, not because they want to hurt the other dogs, but they're afraid that those dogs are going to hurt them. And so when I think about the United States now, and I think, okay, we can, maybe a little bit of that is going on. You know, I've had a couple of conversations here in Korea about, you know, the U.S. and the policies in the U.S. and, you know, how Koreans will adjust. And these are very thoughtful people who are thinking about Korea politically and economically. And their response has been, well, we'll just adjust. We'll adjust. There's no need to fight it. It's inevitable. We'll adjust to that. And I think, that's an interesting response. Because we will ground ourselves, we will be fine, we will move forward, but we'll adjust. It's not attack. It's not even to belittle, say, my country for some of the policies. It's not attack my country. It's saying, okay, well, that's what it's going to be. The sweet spot, right? Balance it out. Oh, this is what it's going to be. Okay, so we will adjust to this now.
You once said that Korea could lead the world in rethinking economic and social structures.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on why you believe Korea has this potential?
You know, I think I said that on a Sebasi stage,
Right,
actually.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so think about some of the really grave problems that are facing humanity. I mean, big problems, right? You know, climate collapse is one, but there are so many, you know. And these are problems that human beings have created. And they're problems that human beings are going to have to solve. But we're never going to solve them unless we solve them together. Now, who do you want? Who's going to be able to do that? Well, the people who are going to be able to do that are the people who are able to work with each other in this communitarian way. There are people who are going to put the needs and desires of other people equal to or ahead of their own needs and desires. It's going to have to be a people, a culture, a society that has a communitarian moral order, meaning that other people are just important as us as individuals. And Korea is such a place. You know, an example I like to use is how every couple of weeks, I think it's 2 weeks, it used to be 2 weeks, maybe it's once a month now, but some of the large stores close down, like on Sundays or one day a week.
You're right.
So that all the small stores can prosper. We would never do that in the West. You don't do that. Let the small stores go under. If they can't compete, they go under. But here, imagine what that means. It means that people are willing to say, listen, we live together as an entire nation. We thrive as a nation or we die as a nation. And so when other people die, when other people are harmed, I get harmed. And so we're going to have these kinds of policies. Americans would revolt before we would ever allow the government to make such a decision like that.
Why do you think that Koreans do like that?
I think because Koreans see that they live together in a community, in one nation. You know, you're a peninsula, you're cut off from the mainland, you see yourselves as a very distinct people. And so then you thrive as a very distinct people. If I were a Korean citizen, I would be proud of my culture because of that. And sometimes for me, when I see the individualism in my own culture, I really struggle. It's very difficult for me to feel proud. We're a big nation, we're going in 100 different directions. We don't have a lot in common with other people in the same nation. We're people from all over the world, very different backgrounds, very different ways of seeing the world, understanding the world, languages spoken. So, you know, we don't feel that tight bond that Koreans feel or that Koreans can feel. It also allows you to really fight amongst yourselves in pretty profound ways. But, you know, it's like siblings fight. Siblings fight really hard, but then they get over it very quickly.
What lessons can other countries learn from Korea?
You know, when citizens have a sufficient amount of trust in their fellow citizens, many, many good things can happen. And I think other countries could learn from that and could help to foster that. So instead of divisions, help to foster this collectivist spirit. Yeah, I think the world would do well to learn more of that.
Korea is known for its fast-paced development, but this also brings challenges like extreme competition and stress. What are your thoughts on the pressures of Korean society?
First off, no country has done what Korea has done in the past 50 to 60 years. It's never happened in human history. It may never happen again, really. And you know, you're only going to do that with an excessive amount of stress and hard work and struggle. You know, somehow you have to slow that down, right? Koreans have developed very, very, very high standards. And when you live in a collectivist society, you look around and you take those standards and you apply them to everybody around you. You know, everybody has to achieve the same standards, which is why when you see somebody fall out of line, when they do something wrong, they get caught, I don't know, drunk driving or something like this, man, it's like everybody comes down on them so hard because we've established these very high standards and we all have to abide by them. So what happens is this culture develops where people have to learn this very fast-paced way of living, and there's not a lot of space to make wrong decisions. And there's not a lot of space to come to an understanding of how to find and live in our sweet spot.
No, right.
You know, how to really take the time to get to know ourselves, to come to an understanding of what we need to understand about how to live our lives so that we stay in that sweet spot.
How can Korean society create a healthier environment for mental well-being?
So in the book, I talk about the role of counseling and the role of therapy. I talk about getting to know oneself. Like, we got to get to know who we are. And, you know, when we don't know who we are, well, it's very difficult to operate in the world. And most of us don't really know who we are because we don't have conversations about ourselves in which we take the time to express our innermost, deepest feelings and thoughts and desires. And in the book, I talk about the role of therapy and counseling. You know, here we have this idea that you go to a therapist or a counselor when you're mentally ill. I have the idea that you go talk to someone when you want to have a conversation with yourself, and you don't have to be mentally ill at all. You have to just want a desire to know yourself better. And I often ask people, when's the last time that you sat and spoke with someone for 45 minutes straight about interesting questions about your life? And that person did nothing more than ask you questions about your childhood, your relationship with your dog, you know, how when you drive your car, how do you feel when you're driving it? These kinds of things, you know. And that's what happens in counseling and therapy. And it's not about mental illness. It's not about depression. You don't have to be depressed to go to counseling. And I think that that's really important for helping to understand how to get to that state of balance and how to resolve the imbalance. And get to the sweet spot and live in the sweet spot. I think more people could do that.
You have interacted with many young Koreans. How do you see the difference between the values of younger and older generation in Korea?
You know, when people ask this question, they usually are implying that younger Koreans are losing the values of older Koreans. Yeah. But in fact, I see it, I turn it around in the other direction. I'm absolutely astounded at the degree to which younger Koreans are holding on to the values that come from older Koreans and that are willing to continue to walk the path of older Koreans.
Why do you think so? Many people believe that the conflict between the younger and the older generation is becoming increasingly severe.
Yeah, well, I think I see, well, first off, it does occur. It does exist. It's not that it doesn't exist, but I think it's happening at a slower rate than most other places around the world. And I think it's inevitable. There are these generational conflicts that go back thousands of years. The new generations don't accept the same things as the old generations or the generations that came before them. But I guess I'm struck by the ways in which younger Koreans, even those who come to the United States and are in my class, how much they remind me of Koreans here in Korea, and they hold on to many of the same values and ways of acting.
Korean culture is becoming more individualistic, especially among young people. Do you think this is a positive or negative change?
Young people are certainly changing the ways in which they are acting in the world. Okay. But you know, let's look at something like K-pop. And look at the K-pop groups. And look at how they interact with one another, how they form these little tiny families. You know, and sometimes the leaders, unless you're really into the group itself, you don't even know who the leaders are. It's just one organism working together. That doesn't happen around the world.
Oh, really?
The leader, in almost every group, certainly in the West. And so I think that, yeah, there's a growing individualism, but I think it's growing more slowly than in most places around the world, and that's okay. So we have a project that we're working on here in Korea. And one of the things that I have said and I'm insisting on is that as we do this project and have these kind of more public conversations, that those conversations have to include younger Koreans and older Koreans. And my reason for that is to explore this issue, the differences in thinking between younger and older generations. But also, I have this idea that the differences in thinking are not that great. And I think what's going to happen is these groups of people are going to discover that they actually are not that far apart in how they think about their own culture and living a good life and how to live life and how to be in the world. But I think there's a much more similarity than they will imagine actually that exists.
In the sweet spot, you emphasize finding balance in life. How does this concept apply to a highly competitive country like Korea?
Every culture in the world is competitive. People are very competitive. Life is a struggle. And so I've never been anywhere where people weren't highly competitive. I think here in Korea, it applies to education in particular. There's hyper competition in the world of education. And a lot of this competition is unnecessary because it takes us away from the place where we really want to be. You know, and competition thrives on us feeling ill at ease, feeling like what we're doing is not what we're supposed to be doing, right? And the sweet spot is about ironing all of that out. It's coming to know who we are, to find that sense of rebalance.
Then what practical steps can individuals take to achieve this balance?
You know, this is a really good question, and I think about this a lot because I am practicing every single day, 24 hours a day.
Really?
I'm one of these people that has lots of ideas, and I impulsively move toward one thing or another thing. And as often as not, the thing I move toward is not the thing that actually unfolds in the way that I imagine it's going to unfold. I mean, people who see me probably don't think that. They probably imagine that things come very easily for me. But I don't. I'm constantly, in a moment's notice, in my mind, it's an inner conversation that I have saying, whoa, hang on. Oh, that's okay. Oh, you don't need that. It's like in an hour's time, there might be 5 or 10 or 20 different times when I'm resetting, just very quickly. And I think the practical advice that I would give to anybody is just pay attention to those tiny little ways in which that reset, that rebalance is happening. Don't start with the big ones. It's the tiny, tiny little ways.
So we have to keep resetting and rebalancing tiny things in the daily life. Right?
The smallest ones you can possibly imagine. Yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to Koreans who feels stuck in their career or personal lives, what would it be?
You know, my one piece of advice is that you're not stuck.
Oh, yeah. We are not stuck.
Yeah, you're never stuck. Nobody's ever stuck.
But we always feel that.
Yeah, everybody feels that. This is, first off, this is not a Korean thing.
Okay.
this is a human thing. Everybody feels stuck somehow in their careers and feels like there's something else out there for them. It's not really this. And so first you have to get rid of that way of thinking. Yeah. And then once you get rid of that way of thinking, then you can start to say, okay, what is it that's really going on for me? And what's really happening? What am I really thinking? What am I yearning for? What am I imagining? And then that's where you start to get to the practice of getting to the sweet spot. And here's the other thing. If you weren't stuck somewhere, that means you wouldn't be anywhere. We're all stuck somewhere. We all do something. The moment I decide to go to this store, I can't go to the other store, right? If I go to see this movie, I can't watch this movie. And I think it's really valuable to have an understanding of that. And again, that's part of the sweet spot that I talk about, that very quick rebalancing in the past. But it's very much true today. So it's not that I don't do it or I don't feel it. It's just that I get to the resetting much more quickly than I used to in the past. You know, we all want to live in some kind of sense of calm and peace, right? Life is better when we feel a calmness. If I can just have a sense of inner peace, and if I can live with that and that sense of calm, that's a good thing. But there are so many things that happen to us to kind of disrupt that calm. You know, it just like throws us off, throws me off, you know, that I expect one thing to happen and something else happens. And then I feel a kind of a little tiny bit of anxiety about that, or some kind of frustration about that. And then I need to quickly rebalance. Well, it's a choice. Do I want to rebalance, or do I want to stay in that sense of anxiety or frustration? And I say, well, I want to rebalance. I want to get back to the calmness. I want to get back to that kind of level, kind of state of being, the one that I just feel content. I want to do it fast, and I want to do it in a very sort of, in a way that I don't even know that I'm doing it. The sweet spot is getting to that place in my life where it happens very easily and very naturally, and I don't even realize that it's happening.
Okay. I think I have a better understanding of the sweet spot. It would be great if Sebasi subscriber could read this book.
It would
together
be
as well.
Really lovely if people would read the book. And the book is organized around different themes like curiosity and intellectual development and finding one's path, and you know, accepting leadership positions and being leaders. And in each one of these themes, I talk about the different ways in which my life has operated, or I've come to see how to live life or how to do things in a way that gets me closer to the sweet spot.
자, 우리 세바시 구독자 여러분. 이 스팟'이라는 우리 샘 리처드 교수님이 쓰신 책, 이 부제가 들어볼 만합니다. 인생의 숨은 기회를 찾는 9가지 통찰. 여기에 그런 9가지 통찰이 들어있으니까요. 많은 분들이 이 책에 관심 가져주시길 바라고요. Thank you for joining us on Sebasi 45 today and sharing your story.
감사합니다. Thank you.
In fact, you are one of the Sebasi speakers, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
I'm
proudly a
thank you.
Sebasi
I look
speaker.
forward to seeing you more often through Sebasi whenever you visit Korea.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.